From anonymity to royalty, the Mafia boss transforms a humble woman, and her beauty makes the rich envious. That is not just a title. That is a true story. And by the end of it, you will understand why the wealthiest families in New York could not sleep at night, knowing that a woman who once cleaned their bathrooms now sat at the head of their table. The first time Elena Vargas entered the Upper East Side, she was 23 years old, carrying a plastic bag with her lunch inside. 2 slices of white bread with a thin layer of peanut butter, and wearing shoes that had a hole near the left toe. She walked past the doorman of a luxury building on East 72nd Street, and the man did not even look at her. He looked through her, the way people look through glass, the way the wealthy look through anyone who is not one of them. Elena had come to New York from a small town in rural New Mexico, a place where the desert stretched endlessly and opportunity was something people talked about, but never actually touched. Her mother had worked in a laundromat for 31 years. Her father had left before Elena could remember his face. She had one photograph of him, creased and faded, and in it he was not even looking at the camera. He was looking somewhere else, already leaving before his body followed. She had arrived in the city with $400, a duffel bag, and the kind of hope that only the truly desperate carry. Not bright, not optimistic, but stubborn. A hope that refuses to die because the alternative is unbearable. Her first job was cleaning apartments. A woman named Mrs. Whitfield hired her through an agency. Mrs. Whitfield lived alone in a 3-bedroom apartment that overlooked Central Park. The floors were marble. The curtains were silk. The refrigerator had more food in it than Elena's entire kitchen back in New Mexico had ever held at one time. Mrs. Whitfield was not cruel. She was simply indifferent. She spoke to Elena the way someone speaks, to a piece of furniture that occasionally needs instructions. The bathroom needs more attention. The kitchen floor has a spot. Do not touch the crystal on the 3rd shelf. Elena nodded. She always nodded. She had learned early in life that nodding was the safest response to almost anything. It kept you employed. It kept you invisible. And invisibility, she had come to understand, was a kind of protection. For 3 years, Elena cleaned apartments. She cleaned the apartments of lawyers, doctors, hedge fund managers, retired socialites, and once, the apartment of a man who had a room entirely dedicated to shoes, hundreds of pairs, arranged by color, each one worth more than Elena earned in a month. She cleaned around the shoes carefully, as if they were sacred relics, and the man never once said thank you. She lived in a small studio apartment in Washington Heights. The elevator in her building had not worked in 2 years. The hallway always smelled of cooking oil and something, faintly chemical. Her apartment had one window that faced a brick wall, and if she leaned out far enough, she could see a sliver of sky. She leaned out often. At night, she sat on her bed and read. She read everything. She read novels, biographies, history books, fashion magazines she found discarded in the lobbies of the buildings she cleaned. She read with the kind of hunger that has nothing to do with food. She read because every book was a window into a world where someone like her could become someone else, and she was beautiful. That is something the story requires you to know now because it matters later. Elena Vargas was beautiful in a way that was easy to overlook when she was wearing a cleaning uniform and had her hair pulled back under a bandana and was carrying a mop. But the beauty was there, underneath the invisibility, the way a painting is still a masterpiece even when it is covered in dust. She had dark eyes that held a kind of quiet intensity, high cheekbones that caught the light in a way that made her face look almost sculpted. Her skin was a deep golden brown, and her hair, when she let it down, was thick and dark and fell past her shoulders in waves. But she did not think about her appearance much. Beauty, in her experience, was not an asset for women like her. It was a liability. It attracted the wrong kind of attention and offered no protection. She had learned this the hard way. At 19, before she left New Mexico, a man who worked at the gas station near her house had followed her home twice. He had said things to her that she tried to forget, but could not. He had grabbed her arm once, hard enough to leave a bruise that lasted 2 weeks. She had not reported it. She had not told her mother. She had simply started walking a different route home, adding 15 minutes to her journey, and she had added the incident to the growing list of things she carried silently. In New York, she kept to herself. She had no close friends. She had acquaintances, other cleaners, a woman at the bodega who always gave her an extra napkin, a neighbor who sometimes nodded in the hallway. But no one knew her. No one saw her. And she told herself that this was fine, that this was the way life was for people like her. You work, you survive, you do not expect more. Then one Tuesday in October, she was assigned to a new building, a building on Park Avenue, and the apartment she was sent to clean belonged to a man named Dominic Calvetti. The agency had told her nothing about the client except the address and the time. She arrived at 8 in the morning, was let in by a woman in a black suit who did not introduce herself, and was led through a hallway lined with dark wood and paintings that Elena recognized from the art books she had read. Real paintings, not prints, originals. The apartment was enormous. It occupied the entire top floor of the building. The ceilings were high. The furniture was dark leather and polished wood. There was a grand piano in the corner of the living room, and through the floor-to-ceiling windows all of Manhattan spread out like something from a film. Elena set to work. She was thorough, as always. She cleaned the kitchen first, then the living areas, then moved toward the bedrooms. She was wiping down a table in the hallway when a door opened behind her. She turned. Dominic Calvetti stood in the doorway. He was in his mid-50s, tall, with silver hair combed back from a face that was both hard and strangely elegant. He wore a dark suit, no tie, the collar of his white shirt open. His eyes were grey, the colour of storm clouds, and they settled on Elena with an expression she could not immediately read. "You are new," he said. His voice was low, calm, the kind of voice that does not need to be raised to be heard. Elena nodded. "Yes, sir. The agency sent me." He looked at her for a moment longer than was comfortable. Not in the way that made her feel unsafe, in a different way. As though he was reading something written on her face that she herself could not see. "What is your name?" he asked. "Eleanor." "Eleanor," he repeated as if testing the word. "How long have you been cleaning apartments?" 3 years, sir." He nodded slowly. 3 years. And before that? She hesitated. Clients did not usually ask her questions. Clients usually pretended she did not exist. "Before that, I was in New Mexico." "What did you do in New Mexico?" "I worked at a diner. And before that, I was in school." "What did you study?" Elena felt something shift in the air. This was not normal conversation between a client and a cleaner. But his tone was not predatory. It was curious, genuinely curious, as if he had found something unexpected and was trying to understand what it was. "I did not finish," she said. "I had to leave." "Why?" "Money." He nodded, as though this was the answer he expected. Then he said something that she would remember for the rest of her life. "You do not belong here," he said. "Not like this." She did not know what to say to that. She stood there with a cloth in one hand and a bottle of cleaning spray in the other, and she felt, for the first time in years, truly seen. "Finish your work," he said. And he turned and walked back into his room and closed the door. Eleanor finished cleaning the apartment. She left. She went home. She sat on her bed and stared at the wall and replayed the conversation in her mind, and she could not understand why a few simple sentences from a stranger had left her feeling as though something fundamental had shifted. She did not know who Dominic Calvetti was. Not yet. She did not know that the paintings in his hallway were not merely expensive. They were trophies from a life built on power and control. She did not know that the woman in the black suit who had let her in was not a housekeeper, but a personal security officer. She did not know that the building she had just cleaned was owned entirely by the man who had spoken to her. She did not know that Dominic Calvetti was the head of the Calvetti family, one of the most powerful organized crime families on the East Coast. A man whose name was spoken in whispers in boardrooms and back rooms from Manhattan to Miami. A man who had built an empire that stretched across real estate, finance, construction, and a dozen other industries, both legitimate and otherwise. She did not know any of this. She only knew that he had looked at her and said, "You do not belong here, not like this," and that those words had landed somewhere deep inside her, in a place she had kept locked for a very long time. She went back the next Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that. Each time, Dominic was there. Each time they spoke briefly. He asked her questions about her reading, about her life in New Mexico, about what she wanted. No one had ever asked her what she wanted. She was not sure she had an answer, but the question itself felt like a gift. On the 4th, Tuesday, he was waiting for her in the living room when she arrived. He was sitting in one of the leather chairs, a cup of coffee on the table beside him, and he looked at her with that same expression, reading, assessing, deciding. "Sit down," he said. She hesitated. "Please," he added. She sat across from him, her cleaning supplies still in her hands. She felt absurd. She felt out of place. She felt like someone who had wandered onto a stage without knowing the play. "I have a proposition for you," Dominic said, "and I want you to listen before you respond." Elena said nothing. She waited. "I have watched you for 4 weeks," he said. "You are intelligent. You are careful. You observe everything. You carry yourself with a dignity that most people in your position would have lost long ago. And you are, if you will forgive me for saying so, remarkably beautiful." Elena felt heat rise to her face. She gripped the cleaning cloth tighter. "I'm not saying this to flatter you," he continued. "I'm saying this because I see something in you that reminds me of myself a very long time ago. I came from nothing. I built everything I have from nothing, and I recognize the same potential in you." He paused. He took a sip of his coffee. "I want to help you," he said. "Not out of charity. I do not believe in charity. I believe in investment, and I believe that you, Elena, are an investment worth making." "What do you mean?" she asked, and her voice was barely above a whisper. "I mean education, refinement, opportunity. I mean giving you the tools to become the woman you were meant to be, instead of the woman the world has forced you to be." Elena stared at him. Her mind was racing. Every instinct she had, every survival mechanism she had developed over 23 years of hardship, was telling her to be cautious. Nothing in life is free. Every offer has strings. Every powerful man who offers something to a vulnerable woman wants something in return. "Why?" she asked. "Why me?" Dominic looked at her for a long moment, and then he said, "Because 40 years ago someone did the same for me, and I have been waiting a very long time to repay that debt." There was a silence. Outside the windows, Manhattan glittered in the morning light, indifferent and magnificent. "You do not have to answer now," he said. "Think about it. Come back next Tuesday, and tell me what you decide." Elena stood. She picked up her supplies. She walked toward the door, and then she stopped and turned back. "If I say yes," she said, "what happens to me?" Dominic looked at her with those grey eyes, and for the first time she saw something in them that resembled warmth. "Everything," he said. "Everything happens to you." Eleanor walked out of that apartment and into the autumn air, and the city looked different to her. The buildings were the same. The traffic was the same. The noise, the people, the smell of exhaust and coffee and street food, all the same. But she was different. She felt for the first time since she had arrived in New York that the future was not a wall in front of her, but a door. She did not sleep that night. She lay in her narrow bed in her small apartment, and she thought about Dominic Calvetti's offer, and she thought about her mother in the laundromat in New Mexico, and she thought about the man at the gas station who had grabbed her arm, and she thought about the years of cleaning and nodding and being invisible. And she thought about the look on Dominic's face when he said, "You do not belong here, not like this." By morning she had made her decision. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel, because stories like this only come once, and the people who stay here never miss a single one. Subscribe now so you do not miss what happens next. The following Tuesday, Eleanor arrived at the Park Avenue apartment, not in her cleaning uniform, but in the only decent outfit she owned, a pair of dark jeans, a white blouse she had bought at a thrift store, and the shoes with the hole near the left toe which she had tried to conceal with a piece of black tape. Dominic was waiting in the living room. He looked at her, and if he noticed the taped shoe, he said nothing about it. He simply nodded and said, "Good. You are here. We begin." What followed was, by any measure, extraordinary. Within the first week, Dominic arranged for Eleanor to move out of her Washington Heights apartment and into a furnished studio in a building he owned in Midtown. The studio was small by his standards, but enormous by hers. It had a real kitchen, a real bathroom with a tub, and a window that faced not a brick wall, but the sky. She stood at that window on her first night and cried, and she was not entirely sure why. He enrolled her in classes, not college, not yet. First, there were foundations to build. He hired a private tutor for English composition and literature, another for mathematics, a third for art history and cultural studies. He hired a voice coach to help her with diction and public speaking. He hired a stylist who took one look at Elena's closet and sighed the way a doctor sighs when the diagnosis is serious but treatable. "You are a canvas," the stylist, a sharp-featured woman named Claudette, told her, "and right now you are covered in other people's fingerprints. We are going to clean you off and start fresh." Elena did not like being called a canvas. She was a person, not a project. But she swallowed her pride because she understood, with the clear-eyed pragmatism that had kept her alive this long, that pride was a luxury she could not yet afford. The transformation was not overnight. It was not a montage. It was slow, difficult, and often humbling. Eleanor struggled with the voice lessons. She had spent her entire life speaking quietly, making herself small, and now she was being asked to fill a room with her voice. The coach, a patient man named Gerald, would stand at the far end of the room and say, "Again, louder. I need to feel your presence before I hear your words." She struggled with the cultural studies. She knew nothing about opera, about classical music, about the unwritten rules of high society, which fork to use, how to hold a glass of wine, how to enter a room in a way that commanded attention without demanding it. She felt, during those first weeks, like a child learning to walk, clumsy, uncertain, constantly afraid of falling. But she did not quit. She had never quit anything in her life. Quitting was a privilege for people who had options. Dominic checked on her progress regularly. He did not hover. He was not sentimental. He would appear, ask her tutor or her coach a few pointed questions, nod and leave. But occasionally he would stay. He would sit across from her and they would talk about books, about ideas, about the nature of power and the illusion of class. "Class," Dominic told her once, "is a costume. The people who are born into wealth believe that their costume is their skin. They believe it is real. They believe it is who they are. But it is just fabric, and fabric can be worn by anyone." "Then why does it matter?" Elena asked. "If it is just a costume, why do I need to learn to wear it?" "Because the world is a stage," Dominic said, "and the audience does not know the difference between a costume and skin. If you look the part, they will believe it, and once they believe it, it becomes true." Elena thought about this. She thought about the doorman on East 72nd Street who had looked through her. She thought about Mrs. Whitfield who had spoken to her like furniture. She thought about every person who had ever dismissed her, ignored her, treated her as though she were less than human because of the clothes she wore or the work she did. "I want them to see me," she said quietly. "I want them to look at me and not be able to look away." Dominic smiled. It was a rare thing, his smile. It transformed his face, made him look younger, almost gentle. "They will," he said. "I promise you that." Months passed. Elena read voraciously. She studied art at the Metropolitan Museum, standing in front of paintings for hours, learning to see not just the image but the technique, the intention, the story behind the brushstrokes. She attended lectures at the 92nd Street Y. She took a course in business fundamentals at a community college in the evenings. Her appearance changed gradually. Claudette, the stylist, was methodical. She taught Elena about fabrics, silk, cashmere, wool, how to feel quality without seeing a price tag. She taught her about color, which shades complemented her skin tone, which ones washed her out. She taught her about simplicity, that true elegance was not about excess but about precision. The wealthy wear fewer things better made, Claudette said. Remember that. One perfect dress will always outperform 10 mediocre ones. Elena's hair was shaped by a stylist on Madison Avenue, who spent 2 hours studying her face before making a single cut. Her posture was corrected by a former ballet instructor who made her walk with a book on her head until it became second nature. She learned to carry herself differently, not with the hunched, apologetic posture of someone trying to take up as little space as possible, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knows she belongs wherever she stands. And something else happened during those months, something that Elena did not expect. She began to understand Dominic Calvetti, not the man the world saw, the powerful, feared figure who controlled an empire from the top floor of a Park Avenue building, but the man underneath, the man who had come to this country as a teenager with nothing, the man who had built his life from the ground up using intelligence and ruthlessness and an iron will, the man who had accumulated enormous wealth and power and yet seemed in quiet moments profoundly alone. He had no children. He had been married once, decades ago, to a woman named Isabel, who had died of an illness when she was only 34. He kept a photograph of her in his study, a beautiful woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Elena had seen it during one of her early cleaning visits, before everything changed, and she had paused in front of it, drawn by something in the woman's expression. A softness, a goodness that seemed to radiate from the image. Dominic never spoke about Isabel directly, but Elena began to understand that his interest in her, in Elena, was connected to that loss, not in a romantic way, in a deeper way. As though by helping Elena, he was honoring something, a promise, a memory, a version of himself that he had lost when Isabel died. She never asked him about it. She understood instinctively that some things are too sacred to be spoken aloud. By the 6th month, Elena Vargas was unrecognizable. Not unrecognizable in the sense that she looked like a different person. She looked like the same person, but illuminated, as though someone had taken a photograph that had been in shadow and adjusted the light, revealing details that had always been there but were never visible. Her beauty, which had been hidden beneath cleaning uniforms and exhaustion and the weight of survival, was now fully visible. And it was not just physical. It was the beauty of a woman who had read 1,000 books and could discuss Caravaggio and Emily Dickinson and the Federal Reserve with equal fluency. It was the beauty of a woman who had suffered and survived and emerged, not hardened but refined. It was the beauty of intelligence and resilience and grace, and it was devastating. Dominic saw it. His staff saw it. The tutors and coaches saw it. And soon the rest of New York would see it too. The first test came at a charity gala. It was a fundraiser for a children's hospital held at the Plaza Hotel. Dominic attended every year. It was part of his public persona, the legitimate businessman, the generous philanthropist, the pillar of the community. The fact that his wealth had roots in activities that would not bear close scrutiny was something everyone knew and no one mentioned. That is how it works in certain circles. Money buys not just things but silence. Dominic told Elena she would accompany him. She nearly refused. The thought of walking into a room full of New York's elite, the very people whose apartments she had cleaned, terrified her. She imagined their eyes on her, judging, recognizing, seeing through her new clothes to the woman with the mop and the peanut butter sandwiches. "They will not recognize you," Dominic told her, "and even if they did, it would not matter. You are not pretending to be someone you are not. You are becoming who you always were. There is a difference." The night of the gala, Elena stood in front of the mirror in her apartment and studied her reflection. She wore a black dress, simple, perfectly cut, elegant. Her hair was down, cascading in dark waves over her shoulders. She wore a single piece of jewelry, a necklace that Dominic had given her, a slender gold chain with a small pendant that caught the light. She looked at herself, and for the first time in her life, she saw what Dominic had seen that first day in his apartment. She saw someone remarkable. The Plaza Hotel was a cathedral of light and money. Chandeliers blazed overhead. Women in gowns and men in tuxedos moved through the grand ballroom like figures in a painting. The air smelled of expensive perfume and champagne, and the faint intoxicating scent of power. Elena walked in on Dominic's arm, and the room shifted. It was subtle at first. A few glances, a few paused conversations, people noticing the way you notice a change in the weather, not with alarm, but with attention. Who is she? She is with Calvetti. Who is she? She felt their eyes on her. She felt the weight of their curiosity, their assessment, their envy. And she felt something she had never felt before, not fear, not self-consciousness, but a quiet, steady power. The power of being seen, the power of being beautiful and knowing it, not with vanity, but with clarity. Dominic introduced her simply as Elena. No last name, no backstory, just Elena. And the simplicity of it only added to the intrigue. In a world where everyone had a title and a pedigree and a carefully curated biography, a woman with just a first name was a mystery. And nothing is more powerful than a mystery. She spoke to people that night. She spoke with grace and intelligence and warmth. She discussed a painting by Vermeer with the wife of a gallery owner and held her own. She discussed education policy with a retired senator and impressed him with her knowledge. She listened more than she spoke, which in that room was a rare and valuable skill. And she noticed something that would become important later. The women in the room, the wealthy, polished, privileged women, were watching her, not with admiration, with fear. Because Elena Vargas, the former cleaning woman from New Mexico, had walked into their world and fit perfectly. And that was not supposed to happen. Their world had walls. It had gates. It had rules designed to keep people like Elena out. And she had walked through all of them as though they did not exist. After the gala, Dominic sat in the back of his car, and Elena sat beside him, and the city lights slid past the windows, like stars falling sideways. "How do you feel?" he asked. Elena thought about it. She thought about the room, the people, the eyes on her, the conversations, the weight and the lightness of it all. "I feel," she said slowly, "like I have been asleep for a very long time, and I just woke up." Dominic nodded. He looked out the window at the passing city, and she saw something in his expression that she had not seen before. Satisfaction, yes, but also something else, something that looked almost like grief. "Good," he said. "Now the real work begins." The charity gala was a beginning, not a culmination. In the weeks that followed, Dominic began introducing Elena to his world more deliberately. Not the shadow world, the world of quiet rooms and whispered deals and envelopes passed under tables. The other world, the world of business, of finance, of real estate, of the legitimate empire that sat atop the darker one, like a gleaming building on an unseen foundation. He brought her to dinners with business partners. He brought her to gallery openings. He brought her to a private viewing of a new real estate development on the West Side, where architects in expensive glasses showed scale models of buildings that would cost hundreds of millions of dollars to construct. At each event, Elena observed, she listened, she learned. She began to understand the language of wealth, not just the words, but the silences, the gestures, the subtle codes that separated insiders from outsiders. She learned that in this world confidence was currency, that knowledge was armor, that beauty, when combined with intelligence, was a weapon, and she began to develop her own voice, not the voice of Dominic Calvetti, not the voice of Claudette or Gerald or any of her tutors, her voice, a voice shaped by her past, the desert, the diner, the cleaning supplies, the nights of reading in a tiny apartment, but refined by her present. A voice that carried both humility and strength, both warmth and steel. People noticed. They always notice when someone new enters the room and refuses to be ignored. First, there were whispers. Who is she? Where did she come from? What is her relationship with Calvetti? Is she a relative, a protégé, a companion? The speculation was constant, and Dominic did nothing to discourage it. Mystery, he had told her, is a form of power. Then came the invitations, a literary salon on the Upper West Side, a dinner at the home of a prominent art collector, a weekend gathering at a country estate in Connecticut. Elena was being absorbed into the social fabric of New York's elite, slowly but unmistakably. But not everyone was welcoming. There was a woman named Victoria Sterling. Victoria was 51 years old, the wife of a financier named Richard Sterling, and she was, by all accounts, the queen of New York high society. She chaired the boards of 3 charities. She organized the most exclusive galas. She decided who was in and who was out, who was acceptable and who was not. Victoria had been at the Plaza Hotel the night of Elena's debut. She had watched Elena cross the room on Dominic's arm. She had watched the heads turn. She had watched the eyes follow. And she had felt something she was not accustomed to feeling, threatened. Victoria Sterling was a beautiful woman. She had been beautiful her entire life. But her beauty was the kind that comes with maintenance, expensive, deliberate, sustained by an army of specialists and surgeons and stylists. Elena's beauty was different. Elena's beauty was natural, effortless, the kind that does not diminish in harsh light or without makeup. And Victoria recognized, with the instinct of a predator assessing a rival, that Elena's beauty was the kind that could not be competed with, only destroyed. So Victoria began to dig. She made phone calls. She asked questions. She used the network of socialites and assistants and personal shoppers and hairdressers that serves as the intelligence apparatus of the wealthy, and within 2 weeks she had the answer she was looking for. She was a cleaning woman, Victoria told her friend Patricia Holloway over lunch at a restaurant where the salads cost $45. Can you believe it? A cleaning woman. She cleaned apartments on the Upper East Side. I heard she may have even cleaned for Margaret Thorne. Patricia's eyes widened. You are not serious. Dead serious. She is nobody. A girl from some dusty town in New Mexico. Calvetti found her scrubbing his floors and decided to play Pygmalion. How very theatrical of him. Victoria leaned back in her chair and sipped her sparkling water. It is worse than theatrical. It is dangerous. If a cleaning woman can walk into the Plaza Hotel and be treated like a princess, then what does that say about the rest of us? What does it say about everything we have worked to build? You mean inherited, Patricia said, with the casual cruelty of someone who has never questioned her own privilege. Earned, inherited, it does not matter. The point is that there are standards, there are gates, and they exist for a reason. So what are you going to do? Victoria smiled. It was a thin, cold smile, the kind that promises nothing good. I am going to remind everyone who she really is. Now I want to pause here and ask you something. If this story is hitting home, if you feel what Elena feels, that moment of being judged for where you came from, instead of who you are, then type in the comments. Your past does not define your future. Type that right now. Let Elena and everyone watching this know that they are not alone. Victoria's campaign was subtle. She did not confront Elena directly. That would have been vulgar, and Victoria Sterling was never vulgar. Instead, she worked through implication, through whisper, through the careful placement of information where it would do the most damage. At a gallery opening, she mentioned casually to a group of women that she had heard the most fascinating story about Calvetti's new companion. She did not provide details. She did not need to. The implication was enough. The women's imaginations did the rest. At a charity meeting, she suggested, with great concern and sympathy, that the organization should be more careful about vetting the guests at their events. We have a responsibility, she said, to maintain the integrity of our community. At a dinner party, she arranged for Elena to be seated next to a woman named Dorothy Haynes, a notorious gossip who could be relied upon to ask probing personal questions with the persistence of a journalist and the tact of a demolition crew. Dorothy did not disappoint. So, Elena, she said, leaning forward with a predatory smile, tell me about yourself. Where did you go to school? Elena felt the trap. She felt the eyes around the table, watching, waiting. She knew that whatever she said would be analyzed, discussed, dissected. I did not finish, School, Elena said calmly. I had to work. Oh, Dorothy said, her eyebrows rising. How interesting. And what kind of work did you do? Elena looked at Dorothy Haynes. She looked at the diamonds around her neck and the calculated cruelty in her eyes. And she made a decision. She could lie. She could deflect. She could play the game the way Victoria Sterling expected her to play it. Defensively, apologetically, ashamed. Or she could tell the truth. I cleaned apartments, Elena said. Her voice was steady. Her gaze was direct. I cleaned apartments on the Upper East Side for 3 years. I cleaned bathrooms and kitchens and floors. I cleaned the homes of people who never looked at me, who never spoke to me, who treated me as though I did not exist. The table went silent. And before that, Eleanor continued, I worked at a diner in New Mexico. And before that, I went to a school where the textbooks were 10 years old and the ceiling leaked when it rained. She paused. She looked around the table at the frozen faces of New York's elite. I am not ashamed of any of it, she said. Every floor I cleaned, every plate I carried, every night I spent in a room the size of a closet reading books by lamplight. It all brought me here, to this table, to this moment, and I would not trade a single day of it. The silence lasted 5 full seconds. It felt like an hour. Then a man at the end of the table, a hedge fund manager named Paul Whitmore, a man known for his sharp mind and his complete lack of sentimentality, began to clap, slowly at first, then louder, and within moments the entire table was applauding. Everyone except Victoria Sterling, who sat with her hands in her lap and her jaw tight, and who understood in that moment that she had miscalculated badly. Elena had done the one thing Victoria had not anticipated. She had refused to be ashamed, and in doing so she had turned Victoria's weapon against her, because the truth Elena had learned is not a weakness. It is only a weakness when you try to hide it. When you own it, fully, openly, without apology, it becomes a fortress. The news spread quickly. By the next morning, Elena Vargas was the most talked-about woman in New York, not because she was beautiful, although she was, not because she was Dominic Calvetti's protégé, although that added intrigue, but because she had stood in a room full of the most powerful people in the city and told them the truth about who she was, and she had not flinched. People admire courage. They do not always recognize it when they see it, but when they do, it moves them. It moves them because most people spend their lives performing, pretending, hiding their true selves behind walls of wealth or status or accomplishment. And when someone tears down those walls and stands naked in the truth, it is both terrifying and beautiful. Dominic heard about the dinner. He called Elena the next day. I heard what you did, he said. Ah, you angry? There was a pause, then he said, Angry? No, I am proud. I have never been prouder of anyone in my life. Elena felt tears in her eyes. She blinked them away. Victoria Sterling will not stop, Dominic said. She will come at you harder now. You humiliated her, and people like Victoria do not forgive humiliation. I know. Are you afraid? Eleanor thought about it. She thought about the desert, the diner, the gas station, the cleaning supplies, the hole in her shoe. She thought about all the things she had survived. No, she said. I'm not afraid. Good, Dominic said, because what comes next will require everything you have. What came next was business. Dominic Calvetti had not invested in Elena's transformation merely for the pleasure of watching her shine at dinner parties. He had a larger plan, a plan that had been forming for years, long before Eleanor walked into his apartment with a mop and a broken shoe. Dominic was getting older. He could feel it in his bones, in the way mornings came harder, in the way the faces of the people around him seemed to grow younger, while his grew more lined. He had built an empire, but empires need successors, and Dominic had no children, no nieces or nephews he trusted, no one in his organization who possessed the combination of qualities he believed were necessary to carry his legacy forward. Until Elena. It was not her beauty that convinced him. Beauty is common. It was her mind, her discipline, her resilience, her ability to observe, to learn, to adapt. Her refusal to be broken by circumstances that would have broken most people. And something else, something harder to define. A moral center, a core of goodness that had survived poverty and hardship and loneliness. Dominic recognized it because he had lost his own long ago, and he missed it the way you miss a limb that has been amputated, with a phantom ache that never quite goes away. He began to teach her about business, not the kind of business taught in schools. Theoretical, sanitized, removed from the reality of how wealth is actually accumulated. He taught her the real business, how deals are made, how leverage works, how to read a contract and find the paragraph that will cost you everything, how to sit across from someone who wants to take your money and convince them to give you theirs instead. He gave her a small real estate project to manage, a building in Brooklyn that needed renovation. It was a test. She was given a budget, a timeline, and a team of contractors who had been specifically chosen because they were difficult, demanding, skeptical, and unwilling to take direction from a woman they did not know. Elena struggled. The first week was a disaster. The contractors ignored her instructions. The lead foreman, a man named Tony, openly questioned her decisions. The budget was already threatening to overrun. She went to Dominic. She stood in his study, exhausted and frustrated, and she said, "They do not listen to me." "Why should they?" Dominic asked. "Because I am in charge." Being in charge means nothing if the people below you do not believe you deserve to be. Authority is given by titles. Respect is earned by actions. "So, what do I do?" Dominic leaned forward. "You learn their world. You go to the construction site and you get your hands dirty. You show them that you are not above the work. You show them that you understand what they do and you respect it. And then, when they respect you, you lead." Elena went to the construction site the next morning at 6 a.m. She wore work boots and jeans and a hard hat. She asked Tony the foreman to show her how a building's electrical system worked. She asked him to explain the plumbing, the framing, the foundation. She asked questions. She listened. She took notes. Tony was suspicious at first. He had seen plenty of bosses come and go, people in suits who knew nothing about construction and cared nothing about the workers. But Elena was different. She was genuinely interested. She was genuinely humble. And she was genuinely willing to learn. By the end of the second week, Tony was telling her about his daughters. By the end of the month, he was telling the other contractors to listen to her or answer to him. The Brooklyn building was renovated on time and under budget. It was Elena's first success, and it changed something in her. It gave her a taste of what it felt like to build something. Not to clean someone else's building, not to admire someone else's painting, but to take a pile of bricks and broken plaster and transform it into something beautiful and functional and hers. She wanted more. Dominic gave her more. He gave her a larger project, a mixed-use development in Queens. Then a commercial property in the Bronx. Then a partnership negotiation with a construction firm in New Jersey. Each project was bigger, more complex, more challenging, and each one Elena handled. She made mistakes. She lost a negotiation early on because she trusted a man who turned out to be lying about his company's financial position. She underestimated the complexity of a zoning issue and nearly lost a permit. She hired an architect who delivered beautiful designs that were structurally unsound. But she learned from every mistake. She developed a reputation for thoroughness, for fairness, for being tough without being cruel. The people who worked with her respected her. The people who worked against her feared her. Not because she was threatening, but because she was relentless. She did not give up. She did not back down. And she always did her homework. Dominic watched all of this with the quiet satisfaction of a sculptor watching a block of marble become a statue. He had known. He had seen it in her from the beginning, the raw material, the potential, the fire that burned beneath the surface. And now the world was seeing it too. But the world seeing Eleanor meant that Victoria Sterling was seeing her too. And Victoria, who had suffered the humiliation of the dinner party in silence but had not forgotten it, was watching Elena's rise with a cold, calculating fury. Victoria's husband, Richard Sterling, was a financier. His firm, Sterling Capital, managed billions of dollars in assets. And Richard Sterling, unlike his wife, was not driven by social standing or personal grudges. He was driven by money, by opportunity, by the scent of profit. And he had noticed Elena Vargas. He had noticed her at the charity gala. He had noticed her at the dinner party. He had noticed the way Dominic was positioning her, not as a companion, not as a decoration, but as a successor. And he had begun to wonder if Calvetti was preparing this woman to inherit his empire. What did that mean for the deals, the partnerships, the financial arrangements that Sterling Capital had with the Calvetti organization? Richard Sterling and Dominic Calvetti had a complicated relationship. On the surface, they were business associates. Sterling Capital managed a significant portion of the Calvetti family's legitimate investments. But beneath the surface, there were other connections, darker connections, connections that, if exposed, would destroy Richard Sterling's reputation and his firm. Richard knew things about Dominic, and Dominic knew things about Richard. This mutual knowledge was the foundation of their relationship, not trust, but the assurance that neither could destroy the other without destroying himself. But Elena was a new variable, a wild card, a woman who owed no loyalty to Richard Sterling and who might, if she gained enough power, decide to rearrange the board in ways that did not include him. So Richard did what powerful men do when they feel threatened. He reached out to his wife. "Tell me about this woman," he said to Victoria one evening in their penthouse apartment on Central Park West. Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Since when do you care about my social observations?" "Since one of your social observations might be relevant to my business." Victoria set down her glass of wine. She looked at her husband, and for a moment the mask of the socialite slipped, revealing the sharp, strategic mind beneath. "She is smarter than she looks," Victoria said, "which is saying something because she looks very smart. She is also genuine, which is dangerous. People like genuineness. They trust it, and if they trust her, they will follow her." "Can she be bought?" "No." "Can she be scared?" Victoria paused. "I do not think so. I tried to humiliate her and she turned it into a triumph. She does not play defense. She plays offense." Richard nodded slowly. "Then we need to change the game." "What do you mean?" "I mean that we need to separate her from Calvetti. Without him, she has no power. She has no network. She has no money. She is just a girl from New Mexico with a pretty face and a good vocabulary." Victoria smiled, that thin, cold smile. "And how do you propose we do that?" Richard leaned back in his chair. "I know some things about Dominic Calvetti that his protégé does not know, things that, if she knew them, would change how she sees him, change how she feels about him, and perhaps change her willingness to be associated with him. You want to destroy their relationship. I want to give her information and let her destroy it herself." Victoria studied her husband. She had married him for his money and his position, and he had married her for her social connections and her beauty. It was an arrangement, not a love story. But in this moment, she felt a genuine kinship with him, a shared purpose. They were both predators, and they had found common prey. "Do it," she said. And so the trap was set. It began with a letter, not an email, not a phone call. A letter, handwritten, delivered to Elena's apartment by a courier. It was addressed to her by name, and it contained no return address. Elena opened it in her kitchen, standing by the window where the light was best. The handwriting was neat, precise, almost feminine. The letter was 3 pages long, and it contained information that, if true, would change everything. The letter claimed to be written by someone inside the Calvetti organization, someone who had worked for Dominic for many years and who could no longer remain silent. The letter described activities that went beyond the vague rumors Eleanor had heard. It described specific operations, specific transactions, specific incidents in which people had been threatened, coerced, and intimidated. The letter described a particular incident from 15 years ago. A business rival of Dominic's, a man named Frank Russo, who had refused to sell his construction company to the Calvetti family. Russo had received threats, his equipment had been vandalized, his contracts had been sabotaged, and then, one night, Russo's warehouse had caught fire. No one was harmed, but the message was clear. Russo sold his company the following week. The letter claimed that Dominic Calvetti had ordered all of it. Eleanor read the letter 3 times. Then she sat down at her kitchen table and stared at the wall. She was not naive. She had known from the beginning that Dominic Calvetti was not a conventional businessman. She had known that his wealth had roots in places that did not bear close inspection. She had chosen to accept this, not blindly, but pragmatically, because he had given her something no one else had ever given her, a chance. But there was a difference between knowing something in the abstract and seeing it detailed in black ink on white paper. There was a difference between accepting a vague understanding and confronting specific allegations. She felt something crack inside her, not break, crack, like ice on a lake in early spring. The surface still held, but the fissure was there, and once a fissure forms, it does not heal. It spreads. She did not go to Dominic immediately. She needed time to think. She needed to determine whether the letter was real or fabricated. She needed to understand what it meant for her, not just emotionally, but practically. Because here was the truth that Elena had to confront. She was not the same woman who had walked into Dominic's apartment with a mop. She was now a woman with properties to manage, with business relationships, with a reputation. She was a woman who was being groomed to lead an empire. And if that empire was built on the things the letter described, then what did that make her? She thought about her mother who had worked in a laundromat for 31 years, who had never cheated anyone, never taken a shortcut, never compromised her integrity. Her mother, who had taught Elena by example rather than by lecture, that the only thing you truly own in this world is your character. Elena spent 3 days in turmoil. She barely slept. She went through the motions of her work, meetings, phone calls, site visits, but her mind was elsewhere. It was in a warehouse that had burned 15 years ago. It was in a letter with no return address. It was in the space between what she wanted to believe and what she feared was true. On the 4th day, she went to Dominic. She arrived at his apartment in the evening. He was in his study, reading. He looked up when she entered, and something in her expression made him set down his book. "What happened?" he asked. Eleanor placed the letter on his desk. "Read this." Dominic read it. His face was expressionless as he read, a mask that Eleanor had seen him wear many times, but that now seemed different, not controlled, empty. When he finished, he set the letter down carefully, as though it were fragile. "Where did this come from?" he asked. "I do not know. It was delivered to my apartment." "By whom?" "A courier. No return address." Dominic was silent for a long moment. He looked at the letter, he looked at Eleanor, and then he looked at the photograph of Isabel on his desk, the beautiful woman with kind eyes who had died too young. "Is it true?" Elena asked. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Dominic did not answer immediately. He stood and walked to the window and looked out at the city. His city in many ways. The city he had conquered. The city that had made him wealthy and powerful and feared and, ultimately, alone. "Some of it is true," he said finally. "Not all of it, but enough." "The fire. Frank Russo's warehouse." "Yes." Eleanor closed her eyes. She felt the crack widen. "Why?" she asked. Dominic turned from the window. His grey eyes were tired. For the first time since she had known him, he looked old. "Because that is how this world works," he said. "Not the world of dinner parties and charity galas. The real world, the world underneath. People do not give up power voluntarily. They do not surrender territory because you ask nicely. They do what they do because they believe they can get away with it. And they stop only when they believe they cannot. That does not make it right. No, it does not. Then why did you do it?" Dominic sat down heavily. He looked at his hands, large, strong hands that had built an empire and destroyed those who stood in its way. "Because I wanted to win," he said. Because winning was all I knew how to do. Because when you come from nothing, the fear of going back to nothing is so powerful that you will do almost anything to prevent it. He looked at her. You understand that fear, Elena. You carry it too. She did understand it. She understood it in her bones. The fear of poverty, the fear of invisibility, the fear of waking up one morning and finding that everything you have built has been taken away, and you are back in the desert, back in the diner, back in the apartment with the broken elevator and the window that faces a brick wall. But there is a difference, Elena said, between fearing something and becoming the thing others should fear. Dominic nodded, slowly. Yes, you're right. There is a difference. And that difference is what separates you from me. There was a long silence. Outside, the city hummed its eternal hum. Traffic, sirens, the murmur of millions of lives being lived simultaneously. The person who sent this letter, Elena said, they want to separate us. Yes. Do you know who it is? I have my suspicions. Richard Sterling. Dominic's eyebrows rose slightly. Why do you say that? Because Victoria Sterling has been trying to destroy me since the night of the gala, and because Richard Sterling's firm manages your investments, he has access to information, and he has motivation. If I take over your business, his arrangement with you may not survive. Dominic looked at her with an expression she had seen before, but now understood more fully. It was admiration, not for her beauty or her education or her social graces, for her mind. You are correct, he said, almost certainly correct. So what do we do? Dominic leaned back in his chair. For a moment, Elena saw the man he must have been 40 years ago, young, hungry, brilliant, dangerous. That depends on you, he said, because after what you have just learned about me, you have a choice to make. You can walk away, leave this apartment, leave this life, go back to wherever you choose. I will not stop you. I will not blame you. You have every right. He paused. Or you can stay and help me build something different, something better, something that Isabel would have been proud of. Elena looked at him. She looked at the photograph of Isabel. She looked at the letter on the desk. She thought about everything, the transformation, the education, the gala, the dinner party, the Brooklyn building, Tony the foreman, the women who envied her, the man who believed in her. She thought about her mother in the laundromat. I will stay, she said, but on one condition. Name it. We clean house, not literally, figuratively. The operations described in that letter, the methods, the intimidation, all of it. We dismantle it. We build something legitimate, something clean, something that can withstand the light. Dominic looked at her for a long time. And then he smiled, a real smile, not the rare guarded smile she had seen before, but a full, genuine, heartfelt smile. Isabel would have liked you, he said. She would have liked you very much. Is that a yes? That is a yes. And in that moment, in a study on the top floor of a Park Avenue building, with the city sprawled out below them like a promise and a challenge, Elena Vargas and Dominic Calvetti shook hands, not as mentor and protégé, not as patron and beneficiary, as partners. The war with the Sterlings was about to begin. The next 3 months were the most intense of Elena's life. The first task was to assess the scope of the problem, how much of the Calvetti empire was clean and how much was not. Dominic was honest with her, more honest than he had been with anyone in decades. He opened his books. He showed her everything, the legitimate businesses, the real estate holdings, the construction companies, the investment portfolios, and the other things, the arrangements that existed in shadows, the relationships that could not bear sunlight. It was worse than Elena had expected. Not dramatically so. Dominic was not the caricature villain that the letter had implied. But the grey areas were numerous, and some of them were very dark. Grey indeed. Contracts obtained through coercion, building inspectors who had been paid to look the other way, business rivals who had been pressured into selling at below-market prices. How do we fix this? Elena asked. One piece at a time, Dominic said. We start with the most exposed operations and work inward. They hired a team of lawyers, not the lawyers who had served the Calvetti family for years, but new lawyers, clean lawyers, specialists in corporate restructuring and compliance. They hired forensic accountants. They hired a consultant who specialized in transitioning businesses from questionable practices to fully legitimate operations. It was expensive. It was slow. It was enormously complicated. And it was dangerous, because the people who benefited from the old way of doing things did not want things to change. There were people within the Calvetti organization who resisted. Lieutenants who had spent their careers operating in the shadows and saw no reason to step into the light. They whispered to each other that Dominic had gone soft, that the woman had gotten into his head, that the old man was letting sentiment destroy an empire that had taken decades to build. One of them, a man named Victor Caruso, who had been with the organization for 20 years, confronted Dominic directly. "You are making a mistake," Victor said, standing in Dominic's study with his arms folded and his jaw set. "This woman, this cleaning woman, is going to bring everything down." Dominic looked at him with those grey eyes. "Victor, you have served this family well for a long time, but the world is changing. The old methods are liabilities now. One investigation, one informant, one ambitious prosecutor, and everything collapses. Elena is not the threat, she is the solution." "She is a child playing dress-up," Victor said, "and you are too blinded to see it." There was a silence in the room that Elena, who was standing in the doorway, could feel like a physical weight. "Be careful, Victor," Dominic said quietly. "You are speaking about the future of this organization, and you are speaking about someone I care for deeply." Victor looked at Elena. His expression was one of undisguised contempt. Then he turned and walked out. Elena watched him go. "He will be a problem," she said. "Yes," Dominic agreed. "He will." But the problem that came first was not Victor Caruso. It was the Sterlings. Richard Sterling had expected the letter to drive a wedge between Eleanor and Dominic. When it became clear that the opposite had happened, that Eleanor was now more deeply embedded in the organization than ever, he shifted strategies. He began to withdraw Sterling Capital's support from Calvetti businesses. Subtly at first. A delayed transaction here, a declined investment opportunity there, a phone call that was not returned, a meeting that was rescheduled and then rescheduled again and then quietly cancelled. At the same time, Victoria Sterling intensified her social campaign. She organized a luncheon for the wives of New York's most prominent businessmen, and during the conversation casually mentioned that Dominic Calvetti's little project, meaning Eleanor, was charming but ultimately unsustainable. She used words like inappropriate and concerning, and what message does it send with the skill of someone who knows exactly how to plant a seed of doubt without leaving fingerprints. Eleanor heard about the luncheon through Claudette, the stylist, who had connections everywhere. "She is building a coalition against you," Claudette said. "Victoria Sterling is telling anyone who will listen that you are not one of them, and never will be." Eleanor was sitting in Claudette's studio, having her measurements taken for a new dress. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, the woman she had become, polished and poised and undeniably powerful, and she felt a familiar anger stir. "She is right about one thing," Elena said. "I am not one of them. I never will be, because I do not want to be. I want to be better." Claudette looked at her and smiled. "Then wear that dress I am making you, and go show them." Eleanor did more than wear a dress. She fought back. She began building her own network, not among the old guard, the Victorias and Patricias and Dorothys of New York high society, but among the new. The young entrepreneurs, the tech founders, the artists, the writers, the people who were reshaping the city not through inherited wealth, but through talent and ambition and hard work. She hosted a small gathering at her apartment, nothing ostentatious, just 20 people, good food, good conversation. She invited a young architect she had worked with on the Brooklyn project, a journalist who had written a profile of a female CEO. a non-profit director who ran a mentorship program for women from underserved communities. She invited Tony, the foreman's daughter, who had just graduated from college and was starting her first job. She invited her old neighbor from Washington Heights, the woman who always nodded in the hallway. The gathering was, by Park Avenue standards, modest, but it was genuine. And in a world saturated with artifice, genuineness is magnetic. Word spread. More gatherings followed. Elena's apartment became a gathering point for a different kind of New York, not the old money, not the social register, but the vital, energetic, diverse city that exists beneath the gilded surface. And something remarkable happened. The old guard began to notice, not with alarm but with curiosity. Some of them, the ones who were tired of Victoria Sterling's tyranny, the ones who secretly envied Elena's freedom from the suffocating rules of high society, began to cross over. They attended Elena's gatherings. They brought their children. They stayed late. Victoria Sterling watched this with mounting fury. Her kingdom was eroding. Her subjects were defecting. The woman she had tried to destroy was building a rival, court, and it was attracting the kind of people, young, dynamic, interesting, that Victoria's court had long since lost. "She is beating you," Richard told Victoria one evening. His tone was neutral, clinical. He was stating a fact, not offering comfort. "She is not beating me," Victoria snapped. "She is being propped up by Calvetti's money and Calvetti's name." "Actually, she is not. I have been watching. She is building something independent. She has her own projects, her own contacts, her own reputation. She is distancing herself from Calvetti even as she strengthens his organization." Victoria stared at him. "Then what do we do?" Richard was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "There is one more option, but it is risky." "Tell me." "Victor Caruso. He is unhappy with the changes Elena is making inside the Calvetti organization. He feels threatened, sidelined. He has been with Calvetti for 20 years, and now this woman is dismantling everything he built. So Victor Caruso has information, real information, not a letter, not allegations, documented proof of Calvetti operations that would interest certain government agencies. If that information were to reach the right people, it would not just damage Calvetti, it would destroy him, and it would destroy Elena along with him." Victoria felt a chill. She was a social warrior, a queen of gossip and influence, but what her husband was describing was something else entirely, something that could not be undone. "That is dangerous," she said. "Yes. If it goes wrong, it will not go wrong. Victor wants out. He wants money and protection. We provide both. He provides the information. The authorities do their work. Calvetti falls, Elena falls, and we are left standing." Victoria looked at her husband, this man she had married for his money, this man she had never loved, this man who was, she now understood, far more ruthless than she had ever imagined. "Do it," she said, for the second time. But they had made a mistake, a critical mistake. They had underestimated Elena Vargas. Elena had been watching Victor Caruso for weeks. She had noticed his growing hostility, his whispered conversations, his secretive phone calls. She had not confronted him. That was not her style. Instead, she had done what she always did. She had observed. She had gathered information. She had connected dots. And one evening, while going through some old documents related to the organization's financial restructuring, she found something, a pattern, payments that did not match any known expense, transfers to accounts that were not part of any legitimate operation, small amounts, small enough to be overlooked, large enough to matter. She traced the payments. They led to a shell company registered in Delaware. The shell company was owned by another shell company registered in Nevada, and that company, after several layers of legal camouflage, was connected to a name Elena recognized. Sterling Capital. Richard Sterling had been siphoning money from the Calvetti organization for years. Not dramatically, he was too smart for that, but steadily, consistently, in amounts that added up to a substantial sum. He had been stealing from Dominic Calvetti right under his nose. Elena took this information to Dominic. She spread the documents on his desk, the transfers, the shell companies, the connections, and she watched his face as he read. When he finished, Dominic was very still. Elena had seen him angry before. This was different. This was beyond anger. This was the cold, quiet fury of a man who has been betrayed by someone he trusted with his money. "How long?" he asked. "At least 5 years. Possibly longer." "How much?" "Approximately $12 million. Dominic closed his eyes. When he opened them, the grey was like steel. "And Victor Caruso?" he asked. "I believe he is in contact with the Sterlings. I believe they are planning to use him to bring information to the authorities. To destroy you. To destroy us." "Proof?" "Not yet. But I have enough to confront him." Dominic shook his head. "No, we do not confront him. We do something better." "What?" "We let him make his move, and then we make ours." What followed was a chess game played at the highest level. Elena and Dominic knew that Victor Caruso was gathering documents to hand over to the authorities. They could not prevent this without tipping their hand. Instead, they accelerated the restructuring. Every questionable operation was dismantled, every dubious arrangement terminated, every grey area bleached white. They worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week, burning through the old organization like a controlled fire through a forest, destroying the dead wood while preserving the living trees. At the same time, Elena compiled the evidence of Richard Sterling's financial misconduct. Not just the payments she had already found, but everything. A comprehensive dossier that documented years of fraud, embezzlement, and misrepresentation. She did not hand this dossier to the police. She did not leak it to the press. She did something more effective. She arranged a meeting. She rented a private dining room at a restaurant in Midtown, a place known for its discretion and its excellent food. She invited Richard and Victoria Sterling. She told them it was a business dinner, a chance to clear the air. The Sterlings arrived expecting a negotiation, perhaps an apology, perhaps a surrender. Instead, they found Elena sitting alone at the table, dressed in a midnight blue dress, her hair pulled back, her expression calm and composed. There was a folder on the table beside her plate. "Thank you for coming," she said. Richard sat down. Victoria sat beside him. They looked at the folder with the wariness of people who know that folders at dinner tables are never good news. "I will get to the point," Elena said. "Over the past 5 years, your firm has stolen approximately $12 million from the Calvetti organization through a network of shell companies. I have the documentation." She opened the folder and slid it across the table. Richard's face went white. Victoria's hand, reaching for her water glass, froze in midair. "I also know," Elena continued, "that you have been in contact with Victor Caruso, that you have been encouraging him to provide information to federal investigators, information that you hoped would destroy Dominic and, by extension, me." The silence at the table was absolute, the kind of silence that exists at the center of a storm. Richard recovered first. He was a financier, after all. His entire career had been built on maintaining composure in crisis. "What do you want?" he asked. Eleanor looked at him, then she looked at Victoria, and she saw in Victoria's eyes something she had not expected. Not fear, not anger, resignation. As though Victoria had always known this moment would come, the moment when the woman she had tried to destroy would sit across from her and hold all the cards. "I want 3 things, Elena said. "First, you will return the $12 million, all of it, within 30 days. Richard nodded. "Second, Sterling Capital will sever all ties with the Calvetti organization, completely, permanently. You will not manage our money, you will not attend our events, you will not exist in our world." Another nod. "Third, and this is the most important one, you will leave me alone, both of you. No more letters, no more whispers, no more social campaigns, no more schemes. You will pretend I do not exist and I will extend you the same courtesy." She paused. She looked at Victoria. "Unless, of course, you would prefer that I send this folder to the Securities and Exchange Commission, in which case we can skip dinner and proceed directly to the consequences." Victoria Sterling, for the first time in her life, had nothing to say. She sat in her chair, in her expensive dress, with her expensive jewelry, and she looked at Elena Vargas, the former cleaning woman from New Mexico, and she understood with absolute clarity that she had lost. Not because Elena had more money, not because Elena had more power, but because Elena had something that Victoria Sterling, for all her wealth and status and influence, had never possessed: integrity. The unshakable, incorruptible, diamond-hard integrity of a woman who knows exactly who she is and is not afraid of the truth. "Agreed," Richard said. Victoria said, "Nothing." She picked up her purse. She stood, and she walked out of the restaurant without looking back. Eleanor sat alone at the table for a long time after the Sterlings left. She did not touch the food that had been ordered. She simply sat and breathed and felt the weight of what had just happened settle into her bones. She had won. Not through force, not through deception, not through the methods that had built the old Calvetti empire. She had won through intelligence, through preparation, through the willingness to face the truth and wield it as a weapon. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Dominic. "How did it go?" She typed back, "It is over." There was a pause. Then, "No, it is just beginning." He was right. 2 years passed. In those 2 years, the Calvetti organization was transformed. The old operations were gone. The questionable dealings were gone. The shadow world that had existed beneath the surface was gone. In its place stood a legitimate business empire, real. Estate, construction, hospitality, community development. That was not merely profitable but respectable. Eleanor was at the center of it. She oversaw the day-to-day operations. She negotiated deals. She managed relationships. She built. She created. She grew. And she remained, through it all, Elena, the woman from New Mexico, the woman who had cleaned apartments, the woman who had learned to carry herself like a queen without forgetting what it felt like to be invisible. She did not forget. That was important, because the world tried to make her forget. The world tried to replace her memories with new ones, memories of penthouses and galas and power. And those memories were real, and she did not deny them. But she carried the old ones too. She carried them like an anchor, not to hold her back but to keep her grounded. She still read voraciously. She still visited the Metropolitan Museum on quiet afternoons. She still ate peanut butter sandwiches occasionally, alone in her now spacious apartment, because the taste reminded her of who she was before and who she was always going to be. Tony the foreman still called her once a month. His daughter, the one who had come to Elena's first gathering, was now working for the Calvetti organization as a project manager. She was good. She was going to be very good. Claudette still did Elena's measurements, although now the dresses were for business meetings and industry conferences rather than social galas. "You have changed the fashion of power," Claudette told her once. "You have shown that a woman does not need to dress like a man to be taken seriously. You dress like yourself, and that is enough." Gerald, the voice coach, had retired, but Elena still practiced the exercises he had taught her. She could fill a room with her voice now. She could command silence with a look, but she still preferred to listen. And Dominic Calvetti, at 58, began to slow down. Not dramatically, not in a way that anyone else might notice, but Eleanor noticed. She noticed the way he paused before standing, the way he sometimes lost the thread of a conversation, the way he looked at the photograph of Isabel more often, as though he was having conversations with her that no one else could hear. He had given Elena power of attorney. He had restructured the organization so that she was, in every legal and practical sense, his successor. The people who had resisted, the Victor Carusos of the organization, were gone. Some had left voluntarily. Some had been asked to leave. Some had simply faded away, unable to adapt to the new world that Elena had built. Victor Caruso himself had disappeared. He had taken the money the Sterlings had offered him and vanished. To Florida, someone said. To Europe, said someone else. It did not matter. He was gone. and the organization was better for it. One evening in November, Elena sat with Dominic in his study. The same study where he had first offered her a chance. The same chair, the same window, with the same view of Manhattan, although the city had changed too. New buildings, new lights, new stories being written on the skyline. "I want to tell you something," Dominic said. Elena waited. She was good at waiting. "When Isabel was alive," he said, "she used to ask me to be better, not to be richer or more powerful, just better. She would say, 'Dominic, you are a good man pretending to be a bad man. Stop pretending.'" He paused. His eyes were on the photograph. "I did not listen. I was afraid. Afraid that if I stopped pretending to be bad, the world would eat me alive. So I kept pretending, and eventually the pretending became real. I became the thing I was pretending to be." He looked at Elena. "You brought me back," he said. "You made me remember who I was before I started pretending, and you gave me something I had given up on." "What?" "A legacy worth leaving." Elena felt tears in her eyes. She did not blink them away. She let them fall. "You gave me something too," she said. "What did I give you?" "You saw me," she said, "when no one else did. You looked at me, a woman with a mop and a broken shoe, and you saw someone worth investing in. No one had ever done that before." Dominic nodded. "Because I recognized you. I recognized the fire, the hunger, the refusal to accept that this is all there is." He reached across the desk and took her hand. "Promise me something," he said. "Anything. When I am gone, do it for someone else. Find someone, a person the world has thrown away, a person the world has decided is not worth noticing, and see them the way I saw you. I promise." He squeezed her hand. Then he let go. "Now," he said, with a trace of his old sharpness, "tell me about the West Side development. Are we on schedule?" Elena laughed. She wiped her eyes and opened her laptop, and they talked about business for 2 hours, the way they always did, the way they always would, for as long as they had. Outside the window, Manhattan sparkled, the city that had swallowed Elena Vargas whole and then, through an impossible chain of events, lifted her up and placed her on a throne she had built with her own hands. Not a throne of fear, not a throne of intimidation, a throne of intelligence and integrity, and the unshakable belief that where you come from does not determine where you end up. From anonymity to royalty. That was her story, but it was also yours. Because the truth is, every single person watching this video has something inside them, a fire, a hunger, a talent, a dream, that the world has not yet seen. The only question is whether someone will look at you and say, "You do not belong here, not like this." And when they do, when that moment comes, the only question that matters is what you will say in return. Elena Vargas said yes, and everything happened to her. Everything. 3 years after that evening in Dominic's study, Elena Vargas stood on a stage in a converted warehouse in the South Bronx. The building had been abandoned for a decade before the Calvetti organization, her organization, had purchased it, renovated it, and transformed it into a community center. The room was full, not with socialites or billionaires or business executives, with people, real people. Young people from the neighborhood who had come for the opening ceremony, mothers with children, older men and women who had watched the warehouse decay for years and could not believe it, had been brought back to life, teachers, social workers, volunteers, and in the front row, Dominic Calvetti. He was thinner than he had been 3 years ago. He used a cane now, although he tried to pretend he did not need it. His grey eyes were still sharp, but they tired more easily. He sat in his chair with the quiet dignity of a man who had made peace with the passage of time. Elena stood at the podium and looked out at the crowd, and she felt the full weight of the journey that had brought her here, from a small town in New Mexico, from a diner, from an apartment with a window that faced a brick wall, from a cleaning cart and a uniform and a pair of shoes with a hole near the left toe. She thought about what Dominic had told her years ago. "You do not belong here, not like this." And she smiled because he had been right. She did not belong in the life she had been living. She belonged in this one. "Thank you for being here," she said, and her voice filled the room the way Gerald had taught her. Present, warm, commanding. This building was empty for 10 years. It was forgotten. People walked past it every day and did not see it. It was invisible. She paused. "I know what that feels like. I know what it feels like to be invisible, to be walked past, to be looked through. I know what it feels like to carry a dream inside you that no one else can see." She looked at the young people in the audience. Their eyes were on her, wide and attentive. "This center is for you. It is a place where you can learn, where you can grow, where you can discover what you are capable of. But I want you to know something. The most important thing you will find here is not a classroom or a computer or a book. The most important thing you will find here is someone who sees you, someone who looks at you and says, 'You do not belong here, not like this. You belong somewhere greater.'" She felt tears threatening. She breathed. "I was lucky. Someone saw me. A man who had every reason to look away instead chose to look closer. And that single act of seeing, just that single moment of recognition, changed the trajectory of my entire life." She looked at Dominic. He was looking back at her with those grey eyes, and they were bright. "So this is my promise to you," Elena said. "This center, this organization, this community, we will see you, every single one of you, and we will not look away." The applause was not polite. It was not restrained. It was the kind of applause that comes from the gut, raw, genuine, full of emotion. People stood. People cheered. A woman in the back row was crying openly. A teenager in a hoodie was clapping so hard his hands must have hurt. Elena stepped away from the podium and walked to Dominic. She knelt beside his chair the way she might kneel beside a father, and she took his hand. "How did I do?" she whispered. Dominic looked at her, and he smiled. That full, genuine, heartfelt smile that she had seen only a handful of times. "Isabel would have been proud," he said, "and so am I." She squeezed his hand. He squeezed back. Outside the warehouse, the South Bronx evening settled in. The sound of traffic, the glow of streetlights, the hum of a neighborhood that was, slowly, coming back to life. Inside, Elena Vargas stood among the people she was determined to serve, in a building she had helped resurrect, wearing the mantle of a legacy that she had not inherited but earned. She thought about Victoria Sterling, who had tried to destroy her with whispers and schemes. Victoria was still in New York, still attending galas, still chairing boards, but her influence had diminished. The world had moved on. The old guard was giving way to the new, and Victoria's brand of cruelty and exclusion was no longer fashionable. She thought about Richard Sterling, who had tried to destroy her with money and manipulation. Richard's firm had been investigated by regulators 2 years after the dinner at the Midtown restaurant, not because of anything Elena had done, but because his practices had finally caught up with him. He had paid a substantial fine. His reputation was damaged. He was still wealthy, still powerful, but diminished, smaller. The way people become smaller when the truth catches up with them. She thought about Victor Caruso, who had tried to destroy her with resentment and betrayal. She did not think about him often. He was a footnote, a warning about what happens when you choose bitterness over growth. She thought about her mother. 2 years ago, Elena had flown to New Mexico and brought her mother to New York. Her mother, a small, quiet woman with rough hands and gentle eyes, had walked into Elena's apartment and stood in the middle of the living room and looked around with an expression of pure bewilderment. "This is yours?" her mother had asked. "This is ours," Elena had said. Her mother lived in New York now, in a comfortable apartment near Central Park, in a building owned by the Calvetti organization. She did not work at a laundromat anymore. She volunteered at a community garden. She took English classes, although her English was already good. She went to the Metropolitan Museum with Eleanor on quiet afternoons and stood in front of the paintings and said, "I do not understand what I am looking at, but it makes me feel something." Elena had laughed and hugged her and said, "That is exactly what it is supposed to do." She thought about all of this, the whole impossible, improbable, extraordinary story of her life, and she felt a gratitude so deep it was almost painful. Not gratitude for the money or the power or the beautiful apartments or the elegant dresses. Gratitude for the moment. That single moment when a man with grey eyes had looked at her and said, "You do not belong here, not like this." Because that moment had been the seed, and everything that grew from it, every struggle, every triumph, every tear, every laugh, every risk, every reward, had grown from that single seed of recognition, from anonymity to royalty, not the royalty of crowns and thrones, the royalty of self-knowledge, the royalty of rising not above others, but to the fullest height of who you were always meant to be. That is Elena Vargas's story, and if you have watched until this point, if you have stayed through every chapter, every twist, every moment of this journey, then you already know the most important truth it contains. It is not about money. It is not about beauty. It is not about the approval of the rich or the envy of the powerful. It is about this. Somewhere inside you, right now, there is a version of yourself that the world has not yet met. A version that is stronger, braver, more brilliant, more beautiful than anything you have yet allowed yourself to be. The only question is whether you will let someone see it, or whether you will be the one who sees it first. Elena chose to be seen, and everything happened to her. Everything. If you watched this far, it is because this story meant something to you. Leave a comment saying, "I watched until the end," so I can know who you are and know who truly loves the stories on this channel. If this story moved you, hit that like button. If it made you think about someone in your life who needs to hear it, share it with them right now. One share could change someone's day, maybe even their life. And if you are not yet subscribed, check that subscribe button right now, because every week this channel brings stories that remind you what is possible when ordinary people refuse to stay ordinary. You do not want to miss what is coming next, from anonymity to royalty. This was Elena's story, but the next story might be yours.